Our next storyteller also has a favorite thing in New York, which is the High Line, which is also one of my favorite things in New York, for those of you who haven't seen it. Ladies and gentlemen, Suzanne.
I come from a family that considered itself pretty non-traditional, and our ethos was that if you were willing to think outside the box, there was always going to be a solution. So, for example, back when my parents were dating, there were no interfaith couples so far as they knew. But my dad was Jewish and my mom was Christian, and they got engaged anyway. They weren't held back. During their engagement, my mom was diagnosed with uterine cancer, and she had to have a hysterectomy before the wedding. And my father came right back with, well, we're still going to have a family, but we're going to have a family by adoption. And that's exactly what they did. And they had a great life. You know, they're artists and entrepreneurs, and we did a lot of traveling as a result of that. Fast forward a generation, that was great, but I needed my own life. And so growing up in New York, of course, I moved to Japan. Mm-hmm. And of course, I married someone from Thailand. Mm-hmm. And we become the first biracial couple that anyone in any of our circles knew. But when I'm expecting my first baby, I come back to the United States, and two of my high school friends decide to throw a baby shower. And I kind of think it was supposed to be a surprise, but it wasn't, because my mom was on the phone whispering all the time. So I knew that there was something in this line coming down the pike. And sure enough, I arrive at my friend Deanne's mother's house, and there are people from all different chapters of my life, from high school, from college, from work, and even some of the moms from my high school friends that knew us growing up. And it was wonderful. You know, there was the pink and the baby blue crepe paper streamers hanging from the ceiling, and it was a wonderful summer day. And by the end of the day, we all kind of migrated over to the screen porch, and whenever there was a breeze, the streamers would flutter. And towards the end, my friend Deanne's mother kind of gathers herself together and decides to tell the story of the day that her daughter Deanne was born. And Deanne rolls her eyes because she has clearly heard this 1,000 times. And then my friend Linda's mother decides she's going to tell the story of the day that Linda was born. And it becomes this thing that goes around the circle of the room, or the side porch. And even my friends whose mothers weren't there could all tell you about the day that they were born. And here I am, and I'm fascinated, but I'm silent. It never occurred to me as an adoptee that people know about when they were born. Everybody gets born. But if you're an adoptee, you can choose to not even register that. And so I was silent. And next to me on the sofa was my adoptive mother, and she was the only mother that didn't have a story to share because she hadn't given birth. And we were silent, and we were separate in our silence. It was a gap. It didn't bring us together, but you go on, and a few weeks from then, I had my first baby. And all babies are cute, and all births are holy and sacred, but this one was my very first flesh and blood relative. And we had a cellular connection that most people take for granted, because most people, unlike adoptees, grow up with mirrors sitting around their dining room table. This was my human mirror. A few years later, I'm expecting my next child, and my mother's cancer comes back, and it has metastasized to her breasts, and she has a double mastectomy at exactly the same time that I'm breastfeeding. So now we've got this new silence where I'm very discreet and cautious about when I go over to the house. It's not going to be when I'm breastfeeding and when she's there in bandages. And we don't talk about it, and we kind of tiptoe around it, and life goes on. And her cancer goes into remission. And she's back up, and she's herself, and I have my third pregnancy, and this time she's fine, and she's there, and we don't worry so much about all that in the past. But life goes on, and that marriage for me ended, and My mother still had 3 good years with her grandchildren, her 3 grandchildren, but then the cancer came back again. And this time she fought it through for 3 years, and she died. And life goes on. And I became a single mother of 3. And what does a single mother of 3 do but fall in love with a single father of 3? And he is the love of my life. And when a husband and a wife already have 6 kids between them, what do? Well, of course, they decide to have a 7th child. And this pregnancy, there was some of that silence, but it wasn't the silence between my mother and I as the fertile woman and the infertile woman. It was the silence between the generation that's living and the generation that's passed on. And it was really important to be able, for me, to bridge that silence before having this new life. And for all of the creativity I thought I brought to other things, I just couldn't come up with this sort of neat, non-traditional solution that would take us beyond that. But my husband grew up in an Orthodox community, and there is a Jewish tradition that you name a newborn after a deceased relative, which we did. And so with one tradition, we were able to bridge that gap between the living and the dead generations and break that silence with one word: Caroline.
I do think that Caroline should also come up and take a bow.